Thank you. So before we start the screening, I would like to introduce our guest speaker for tonight and invite her to the stage to say a few words. So Nakuset is an activist and the executive director of the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal. She's Cree from Lac La Rouge in Saskatchewan, and she was adopted by a Jewish family in Montreal and builds on her experience as a 60s scoop survivor in her work in the field of Indigenous children and care. She sits on the steering committee of the Montreal Urban Aboriginal Community Strategy Network. Nakuset is the creator, producer, and host of Indigenous Power, and she was voted Woman of the Year 2014 by the Montreal Council of Women. Nakuset was featured in the award-winning CBC series Real Talk on Race and is dedicated to improving the lives of urban Indigenous people in all of her work. So if we could welcome Nakuset to the stage.
Thank you. I just want to do a shout out to Stefan, who is just down here, and he's talking about the Native Friendship Center. And when I was young and trying to get my Indian status, that's where I went. And they really, really supported me. So I hope you can all make it, and he rocks. So I just wanted to say that quickly. So I run the Native Women's Shelter. I've been there for 20 years now. So I mean, our mission is to help Indigenous women and children and give them a safe, supportive environment to empower them. A lot of the work that I do has extended to services outside the shelter because we want to keep them safe when they're in the shelter, but they eventually have to leave. So through the work that I do at the shelter, we do projects like the Ishkwe on missing and murdered Indigenous women. We have a family care worker to help with the children who are currently at Batshaw, either in foster care or their parents are trying to get them sort of out of the homes and back into the families. We have the Cabot Square Project. We have a psychologist at the shelter. We have just an enormous amount of services to support Indigenous women. And what's nice with the Cabot Square Project is we also help the men that are on the streets. So I really look forward to the Q&A afterwards. And I know that the subject matter is super important to me because as a child I was in foster care and ended up here in Montreal through adoption through the 60 Scoop. So, okay, so then I'll see you after the show.
Thank you. Enjoy the film.
That was depressing. It's hard because it's like you see all this mobilization and trying to make change, and then the last little, subtitle where it says that they got to start all over. And that is the reality of it. The kind of work, like honestly, tomorrow morning I have a meeting with Youth Protection because I'm always trying to advocate on behalf and trying to create change. And it's something that I signed a collaboration agreement with them in 2011 or 2013. Okay, 2013. So that was 6 years ago. So you sign this collaboration to work together for the betterment of the Indigenous children, and it's pretty much ignored. So 6 years later, I have to go back to the table and I have to keep reminding them, and you spend a lot of time, and there has been some improvement, but it's like you take a step forward and then 2 steps back and then a step forward, and I really hope in my lifetime that I'm going to see the change. I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with the Viens Commission, because when the Viens Commission came last year, they spent an entire week taking testimony of children that had been in foster care and their experience. And then the Viens Commission even went to Youth Protection and got some of the input from the social workers. And they are going to have recommendations fairly soon. Now, what happens with those recommendations? Does anybody read them? If they read them, do they apply? Or is it just sort of a report that goes on a shelf and the province says, we did a really good job on this, we got the report, Now y'all need to just sort of leave us alone. We know what to do. At the end of the day, it is going to be the frontline workers that are going to continue to help Indigenous parents try to get their kids back, and those that work in the organizations to put pressure on the agency to create change. And the only way to do that is to basically stalk them, to show up almost on a weekly basis, really friendly. Hi, I'm back. What are you doing with the change? And I have to say that after 10 years of working with youth protection, I'm not so friendly. Anyway, so I guess that's what I have to say for that. If anyone has any questions, this is the time to ask, and hopefully I can answer them. It was very similar in terms of the government created the residential schools. I think they started the first one in something like 1700s with New Brunswick residential school. And then they started to close them down. The last school closed in 1996. They started creating the 60 scoop beforehand. Because they started closing down the residential schools before that, they slowly started to close them down. And a lot of disclosures were made about abuse, and the government sort of got the idea that, okay, wait a minute, people are coming out, they're saying horrible things, we need to change the policy, but we don't really want to change the policy because basically we still want to assimilate Indigenous people. For the Indian Act, when you went to residential school and you graduated, then you were no longer an Indian. You were disenfranchised, you lost your Indian status. Through the Indian Act, that changed over the years, but they still wanted us to lose our Indian status. So what they did was they started implementing the 60 scoop. So it was a provincial initiative where each province would go into the communities and they would decide whether or not the families were capable of raising their children. And usually because of poverty, they would take the children. So they called the scoop because all these kids were gone. And it was basically like, what? Where'd you go? Where's my kid? So it happened very quickly, and they were placed into non-Indigenous homes, and their names were changed, and it was very hard for them to retrace. And the records were badly kept, so some adoptees never, ever could find their way back to their communities. So that started in the 50s, 60s, even though it's called the 60 scoop. I was born in the 70s, so I was still part of that, and they did it through AIM, which is called Adopt an Indian or Métis program. So what they did was they would put little advertisements in newspapers. Sally is really cute but needs a family. Only Sally's mom never knew that Sally was actually in a newspaper clipping. I was adopted through Jewish Family Services. So what they did was they completely cleared out all the kids in the adoption agency and only had a stack of Indigenous kids, and we were from all over. So I was living in Thompson, Manitoba, and my Jewish adopted family looked at my picture and said, hey, we'll take her. And I was flown down from Thompson to Montreal when I was 3, and it took me a really long time to find my way back. So a lot of people that went through the 60 scoop, 85% of the adoptions failed, meaning that the kids ran away. There was very few families that had a very strong relationship. There definitely were, but it was really the minority. And this is why I work so hard with youth protection, because they are still overrepresented in the foster care system. And unless we start implementing a change now, it will be the same. So I've been very active because of my own personal experience to make sure the next generation doesn't go through that. That was a really long answer. I bet you're sorry you asked.
Oh, thank
Sorry.
you.
There have been changes in the communities. So like the Innu community is now in charge of their own social services. Ganawage also has their own social services. So if this is a new trend that's happening and it's awesome, it doesn't apply to the city though. If you're in the city, you still have to go through the social services, through Batsha, through Centre La Jeunesse. So for sure, the communities are taking their power back, but the cities are still lagging behind. I know Toronto has a really good center. They have the Circle of Care. They have their own social services in the city affiliated with the regular foster care system. So Toronto is doing great for Indigenous initiatives. What do you want to do? It's a loaded question. What do you want to do?
I know. I mean, I'm not sure I can.
Well, what are your strengths and what do you want to do, right? I mean, I have to pull out Lori. Lori, just stand up for us, please. All right, she's not going to stand up. She just waved, and she's wearing a white coat. But she's really awesome because she's an ally. So what she does is she photographs the events that I put together at Cabot Square. And when I have to get new funding, the pictures that she took, I bring to my presentation, and I'm able to show through pictures how incredibly successful these events are. So whenever we have a chance to work with each other, she also photographs the spirit walk. Whenever I need to demonstrate to the white world about what the good work we're doing, she's able to document it, because that's her strength. So what is your strength, and where are you comfortable working? You know, I mean, you know, I run the Native Women's Shelter, but there's also the Native Friendship Center, and there's, you know, I don't know, 30 different Native organizations, easily Indigenous organizations in Montreal, plus there's other organizations that have Indigenous clientele. So where are you most comfortable, and where can you shine and help us? I would like to change the whole child welfare system, and not only do I have a magic wand, I have a proposal. So that was already sent to the McConnell Foundation, and now I need to find 2/3 of the other funding, and I want to change the entire system and get the Indigenous people involved, even those that went through the foster care system either as a child or as a parent, to use their expertise about what worked, what didn't work, and have them teach the social workers. It's a big project, and I know the McConnell Foundation loved it, but I need to find the other funders in order to push it forward. So this is something that's going to take some time to develop, and that's okay, because a lot of things don't happen overnight. But you know, I'm really focused on it, and I really feel that because of my personal experience, I have the opportunity to make the change so the next generation doesn't have to go through this. So I think that's sort of like my calling, and that's what I'm going to continue to do until, you know, I'm too old and in some group home or whatever you call it, old age home, and can't do it anymore. But hopefully we'll be able to inspire others to continue the fight, because it's, you know, there's a lot of work to do. Have you heard of what Cindy Blackstock tried to do with the courts? Yeah, there's a movie about that, Alanis Obomsawin's latest film called, oh my God, do you remember?
We can't make the same mistake twice.
Yeah, we can't make the same mistake twice. Try watching that. See what she did. See how she went to court with all the documents and proved her case and won, and the government has not budged. So you take it to court, you win, and there's still no change. So that's not a fight for me. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not in that. I would prefer to work with the agency, kind of like what they did in this film, where they sit down with the people and have a conversation and offer best practices and move forward that way. I also try to get people that are more qualified than me. So I work with Dr. Elizabeth Fast, because people will take her more seriously because she is a doctor. I'm just an executive director, and she is doing a research into the work that we're doing with youth protection, and she will do a report. And when that report is done, if it shows that youth protection is not doing what they said they would do, they will look not so great. So I think that by working with them, they are going to make that extra effort because they want to come out shining in that report. Plus the Viens Commission also is sort of breathing down their neck right now. When that report comes out, it's going to look really damaging to them. So they could be part of the solution instead of being part of the problem. And that is my way of moving forward, working with the families, working to get the funding to make sure that they have appropriate staff to help them fight the system, working with the system, researching it, and like you said, they do like the reports at the end, but making sure they actually implement them. That takes a little bit more time, but it's worth it. Well, people are using the term reconciliation now instead of reconciliation, like the Indigenous people, because we want to see action. It's one thing to say reconciliation, but show it, prove it, walk the walk, make the changes, treat our people nicer, change the laws. I mean, I have a tendency to overextend myself. You know, I work with the police, and now I'm working with, you know, the bylaws to make sure that our people aren't over-ticketed, and, you know, working with youth protection and working on missing and murdered, and now I'm gonna open a second stage housing, and, you know, it's like everything that needs to change, I keep stepping up. And I need other people to step up with me because I can't do it all by myself, and I have been lucky to be surrounded by people that also want to be part of the solution, but this action, that's what everyone should do. What can I do? Where can I use my expertise to help the Indigenous people of Montreal, in the city? What is the priority? Oh my God. Priority should be that the mother and children stay together. The families are united. The families have the resources. We have the resources here, you know, in Montreal. They have to do the effort, and they have to want to bring the mother and child together, and they have to stop listening to what happened before with, you know, the fact that it's better to separate the child and mother. It's not the truth. And unless we change that, it's going to continue. The cycle will continue until someone makes it stop. So I'm trying. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it is impossible. But I love the fact that they're with another family member.
Exactly.
I mean, personally, my mother was incredibly physically abused to me, my biological mother, so I could not be with her. However, I could have stayed with my brother. There are other family members. The social workers didn't look outside the box. They were just like, put them into white families. So I like the fact that you're looking at those other recommendations. And also the Native Women's Shelter, we also have staff that can help that mother to get back on her feet so that she can have her kids back. So y'all need to call me. But I'll be at Youth Protection. I'll be in Harley's office, so feel free to drop by, or Abdu's office. I'm meeting with both of them tomorrow, so come on by. 9:30. That's where it's really difficult, because me too, my family was in Thompson, Manitoba, but I'm originally from Lac La Ronge, Saskatchewan. Right now there's 34,000 urban Aboriginals, so in Montreal. So there's a huge population here, and they can't just return to their community for whatever reason, so they have to stay in Montreal. So what we try to do is find all those holistic services here for them, and try to build relationships with youth protection and advocate on their behalf and teach the women their rights. Because a lot of times, no offense, not this social worker, but some of the social workers won't tell the client their rights, like, oh, you're not allowed to have an advocate, I'm just gonna meet with you one-on-one, or sometimes they'll look,
Like supervised visits and stuff, you can't even see your kids without someone sitting there watching, like all these things.
Well, that's why we try to get involved. Like, we can do sometimes the Batshaw will allow the supervised visits to be at the shelter, and it will be a mother who's not even at the shelter, but we will allow that. We try to go over and above. And that's why I'm meeting with Youth Protection tomorrow, because they have another new program that they're gonna try to create, and we wanna be involved in that. Because what they're doing is with the Black community, which is absolutely amazing. And I was like, what about us? when do we get to have this program? So now I have to go and implement that to make sure, because sometimes with the programming, with youth protection, they have that first, it's called the EO. It's the first department that comes in and they hear a call. And there's a problem, go check it out. And that's when the child is put into foster care. We want to work closer with that team to make sure that they're not being prejudiced, if I can say that, and have one of our workers kind of work with the social worker and say, no, that's actually culturally appropriate. That's not, if that person is, Enoch and eating on the floor, that's the way they do it. It's not that they're savages. So we have to kind of give them that information. Oh, okay, so this is good. All right. But also offer more services to that family so that if youth protection decides, okay, everything is good here, we can still give them services to strengthen the family so that youth protection doesn't get called again. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but nice to meet you.
All right, well, I think we can wrap up here, but thank you so much for joining us. Maybe we can give another round of applause and thank Nakuset. Thank you so much.